Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lambremont Webre, and today we're with our distinguished guest, independent scientist Leuren Moret, coming to us from Berkeley, California. Welcome, Leuren.
Thank you, Alfred. Thanks for having me on, and I'd like to welcome the audience and thank them for being here too.
Well, today we've asked you to prepare a very special program. It's entitled Breakdown Breakthrough, and those are the processes that large-scale systems go through. It's when they go to a next state, and it's kind of breakdown for the West, breakthrough for the East, breakdown for the catastrophic, breakthrough for the positive. Could you say more about that and lead us through this amazing program?
Well, basically, it's the Jesuit minuet. And as I've been revealing to people and putting out there for public to increase public awareness, I was able to trace the very top Jesuits who run the world and have run the world for 3,000 years. I was able to trace them back to ancient Iranian tribes who came from the areas of Uzbekistan and Tajikistan in Central Asia. And the Uzbeks made their way to the Parthian Empire. They actually established it. And the Med tribes were the most cruel, and they believed in slavery and no right to ownership, and many of the themes and the agendas that we see being played out now, those are all Jesuit, originating with the top Jesuits who are Zoroastrian worshipers, and they believe that they're entitled to rule the world. They believed that for 3,000 years. So they traded silk. They made the finest silk in Asia and Central Asia, brocades and things. And they traded them all along the Silk Road. And the Silk Road basically is a big grasslands pathway that is located, it extends from the Pacific coast of Asia all the way across Asia, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and then Europe all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, Portugal and Spain. And this has a very, very rich history. Civilization actually started in Central Asia with people like these Iranian tribes. And so I got very, very interested in this when I was able to start tracing those ancient Iranian tribes to actually people who are living today, and they are actually actors on the global stage, acting out this, well, I guess I would call it a passion and greed play, because they're passionately greedy. And they're the reason, because they've harvested the fruits of labor of every generation for 3,000 years, and they've kept that money for themselves. They are the richest people in the world now, and they seem to never be satisfied. It's a hunger that increases, and increases and increases. The more they have, the more they want. And one of the famous ones, which no one even knows, is Fidel Castro. And Fidel Castro is from a ducal, 3 ducal titles, ancient Iranian family at the very top of the Jesuits, who made up some of the popes of Rome. And Castro is directly descended from Pope Paul III, or Alejandro Farnese, and his family set up the 12 flagship Etruscan cities in the peninsula and the northern part, the Piedmont of Italy. They also set up the Roman Empire, and they also set up the Habsburg Empire, and they have very, very strict breeding programs, which we'll talk about during the interview. But basically, that's who we're talking about today.
That's very, very interesting. We can get into later some of Fidel Castro's Jesuit background and his Jesuit handlers in Havana, Cuba. But as far as the breakdown, it looks like the United States is turning toward the Cuban vaccine program and the Jesuit trained Cuban vaccine program for its adult mandatory vaccine program now. Could you talk about that?
Yes. Well, when I first discovered, I began to really investigate Fidel Castro. And I said, I wonder, I mean, he said that he's Jewish a number of times in the last couple of years, publicly in the media. And he said, oh, we've been here a long time. We're conquistadors. Well, that was at the time of Columbus and the explorers who came after him. And so I didn't quite think that Castro's story was probably okay. So I did really do a lot more investigation. And I found out that the Castros were part of the Farnese family. They built the Pentagon, and they owned most of federal Washington, D.C. And I just couldn't figure out why Castro his father had moved from Spain to the island of Cuba, and within no time, he owned 11,000 acres of sugarcane fields. He had a sugarcane plantation like your family did in Cuba. And he had all these wives and girlfriends and everything. So Castro was one of the younger children in quite an extended family. But he was always a thug. He always had a gang of boys or adults, gangsters, mafia, Cuban mafia, or whatever you want to call it. And leaders, whether they're leaders of little high school gangs or street gangs or neighborhood gangs, it's the same character defect and motivation that puts people like Castro at the very top of the power structure globally. And they all have a lot of things in common. In that book about Fidel Castro, it's only a year old, and it was written by his bodyguard, who said that he was a horrible drunk and womanizer, and he had chateaus and castles and very, very fancy homes, at least 20 of them hidden all over Cuba, mostly on islands. He is very, very wealthy. He's very, very wealthy from his own bloodline, but he is also very, very wealthy on his own because Cuba's never paid back any of their loans to any countries that have loaned them money. And so with the exposure, the announcement of this cancer vaccine, lung cancer vaccine, I suddenly realized that Castro is providing some of the poison agents and poison programs that the Jesuits are so famous for. And it is this lung cancer vaccine created by Cuba over the last 25 or more years that I believe will become part of the global mandatory adult vaccination programs that are popping up all over. And these mandatory programs, vaccine programs for adults, the adults have nothing to say over what they're given or why or anything. It's just mandatory, period. It's illegal. It violates the Constitution and other laws. And they're doing this in the U.S. They're trying to introduce it and get it passed in Australia, in New Zealand, in Serbia. I believe it's in the Ukraine and other countries, Germany, other countries in Europe. And people all over the world are very, very upset about it.
Right. And wasn't the Gates Foundation involved in propaganda as well?
Yes, the Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett have put their money together into a big joint foundation. And what's really interesting is that many countries are being sprayed with chemtrails. And thank you for putting chemtrails in your bill 2911.
2977.
I'm sorry, HR 2977, which was introduced in 2001. Is that when it was?
Yes, it was in October 2001, right after 9/11.
Right.
And yeah.
And that's a very, very good definition of HARP. It will probably always be the best one. And God, you were so insightful and just right on by introducing that and including the definition of chemtrails in that bill. Unfortunately, it didn't pass, but sometimes that's even better. I think that more people are getting involved with it and recognizing it now because they're actually experiencing these weapons that are being perpetrated on ordinary citizens all over the world. And these are the chemicals and the frequencies and the radiation and all the garbage that's in the chemtrails, and they are poison. They are multi-vector, very deadly poisons, and they're already having a very severe effect all over the world in terms of making people sick and also causing deaths.
Right. Well, there we have some late breaking news that came in just prior to the program, which you'll be able to report when we get to the breakthrough part of the program later on.
Yes. So people have been aware, but because it's happening to them now and it's all out in the sky, it's for public view and everything, and there are consequences. People are getting, I've been getting staph infections all along my hairline and on my feet if I go out barefooted or if I don't wear my hat every day when I go out. And we have planes that are stacked up 6 layers at different altitudes. These are big Dreamliners and other types of planes that are spraying the chemtrails. And I investigated a couple of years ago the Seattle airport because these big planes, Dreamliner planes with unmarked, no tail numbers or any ID on them at all, were landing in the Seattle area. So one of the women up there sent out a schedule of all the planes that were landing. And of course, these planes have no ID on them, so you don't know where they're from. But it is required on this list to include the airport of origin for each flight. And guess where these planes were coming from?
Tell us.
Edwards Air Force Base in Southern California. So they're flying offshore from the West Coast and spraying out over the water. And they may even be out in international waters, which makes them exempt from U.S. laws. And then these clouds drift in, and there's a dirty layer. We have many photos of them with all the chemicals in it, and it's parked over the Bay Area, over the black and the poor neighborhoods. And so the big rain clouds come in from the Pacific, and they are steered right over the neighborhoods that they want to depopulate. And buckets of water start pouring out of the Western Pacific weather that basically is a lot of moist air. And that's all rained out into the Black and the poor communities around the San Francisco Bay Area. The richer communities, of course, have sunshine. They don't have the rain clouds and the dirty chemtrails under the rain clouds. And every time that we go into a poorer area of San Francisco to do errands or whatever, or Oakland, the East Bay of the Bay Area, there are fewer and fewer people still alive, living on the street or very poor. And you can see a lot of stress in people, and they are really wondering how they're going to make it. They even say, as they hold their hand out, their cup out, asking for a donation, they even say, I don't know how I'm going to make it. It's getting much, much harder.
Right, right. Now, there are also elevated levels of radiation that are detected from the Ukraine. Could you talk about that?
Well, there is a very, very serious issue today, which has been looming since the proposal that radiation could be used for nuclear power to create energy, generate electricity. And Einstein said very frankly, that's a hell of a way to boil water, because it's the most expensive form of energy that is generated, and only a government can afford that, but it's really the people who subsidize it. It's too expensive for conventional energy companies. They would not even install or set up nuclear power plants until the government agreed to take on all of the liability, not just for accidents or whatever, which were inevitable, but also for the spent fuel, which is highly, highly radioactive. It's very, very dangerous. And that's what happened at Fukushima. It blew up. Now, we're having the same thing happening now today in the Ukraine, because the United States CIA and the Jesuits held a colored revolution funded by George Soros and his Open Society in about 2004 in the Ukraine, and taking over the Ukraine, overthrowing the government and occupying it, has been an American plan for probably 100 years. They've had that goal for a very, very long time. And the Ukraine has only had its own independence for 23 years in its whole history. And that's the last 23 years after the fall of the Soviet Empire, the Soviet Union. And so these people are not accustomed to self-determination. They're not real sophisticated in politics and stuff. There's horrendous corruption, just every kind of corruption that you can imagine. The Russian mafia and the Ukrainian mafia, I think they're the same organization or same network. But they staged, for instance, the slaughter and the genocide in Rwanda, and that was staged by Ukrainian and Russian oligarchs who wanted to strip the wealth of the colonists, the white colonials in Rwanda, and they weren't interested in the Hutus or the Tutsis, the African tribes. They just used their genocide as a cover, and it was linguistic programming, in other words, transmitting frequencies through antennas across all of Rwanda with algorithms or messages or commands in a mathematical language that controlled the behavior and the moods and the actions, the violence of the people who engineered and carried out the Rwanda slaughter. And we're sort of seeing, we're just seeing genocide in country after country. It's just horrendous, and the U.S. has their fingerprint on almost all of it. But they're not the only country doing it. It's the superpowers and the organized crime and the military in those superpowers and the ruling elite at the top who are engineering these takeovers and overthrows, and then just the complete stripping, and then finally the scorched earth is the last treatment where they completely destroy the environment. Now, the Jesuits had done this to 98 countries by the mid-1800s, and they were thrown out of 98 countries. They were prohibited from living or acting or doing anything in those countries. And Switzerland and Norway actually passed laws that they could never live there either. So these Jesuits are just a rebranding of these bloodline, ancient Iranian bloodlines. And Stalin was Iranian through his mother, and these bloodlines go through the females in the family, not the males. And Ataturk and I believe Tito also had some Iranian blood. The Shah of Iran is from one of the top Jesuit Iranian families, the Pahlavichi. And Leon Panetta, who was the Secretary of Transportation for Bill Clinton, and then for Obama, he became the CIA chief for 2 years, and then he became Secretary of Defense for 2 years, and then he retired. But what was he doing all those years in Congress? I traced him back to a small village through his father and mother in Italy, and it's the headquarters of the 'Ndrangheta, which is the biggest and richest mafia in the world. And it was Leon Panetta who took a small village mafia that his father, and he has to belong to it also, multi-generational. And Leon Panetta, during his time in the cabinets of Obama and Clinton, he reorganized the Ndrangheta, modernized it, and then structured it like the Medellin cartel in Colombia and the Mexican drug cartels. So it's not structured anymore like an Italian mafia family. It's modernized, and their favorite enterprises are human trafficking and drugs. And the human trafficking, the Ndrangheta have been involved in procuring young teenagers, girls and boys, who are taken to royal estates in Belgium and the Netherlands and England, the British royal family, the Dutch royal family, the Belgian royal family, many others. George Soros is involved, and these children are hunted naked by these royal adults and their wives, and until they drug them up, and then they chase them through the woods, and then they shoot them and kill them. And they cut the penises off the boys, and they have a special room where they stick a pin or a nail, stick them into the wall. So there's a collection of them in one of Queen Beatrice's lodges or one of her estates. And so this whole reorganization of the planet that is going on, it's all by criminals. It's all about criminal activity. It's all about dehumanizing humanity. It's really horrendous, Alfred, and it's very frightening. And I believe that Stanford University, the University of California, UC Davis, UCLA, and UC Berkeley, and of course UC San Diego, are completely involved in rolling out this agenda and providing the development of the technologies that are needed to do this global takeover. And it's really crazy, and the Dutch are very, very involved.
Right. Could you talk more about the neuro-linguistic programming, the biology of aggression that
Yes.
makes science, the Phoenix program in Vietnam, the Nameless War,
Yes.
and how that ties into Jade Helm and
Yes.
how that's
Yes.
attempting to be implemented.
Yes. Well, these Army manuals and Air Force manuals and U.S. military manuals started showing up in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. And they were about mind control and about pedophilia, about these were projects that involved very, very illegal undertakings. And it was to establish and set up the technologies of political control that have now been developed. They've been covertly tested on Americans, Canadians, and other people in other countries, especially countries we're at war with, and around the universities. And the universities today are extremely dangerous. It is no place to send your children, your young adult children, to get an education, because they're training them to overthrow their own countries. And this is where the neuro-linguistic programming fits in. And just a year and a half ago, before Janet Napolitano came to California to become the president of the University of California, after being the Secretary of Homeland Security in Obama's cabinet, she arrived. But before that, we had quite normal a quite normal environment in the Bay Area, although this was a big center for MK Ultra, COINTELPRO, things like that. And now we see with what they're testing and how they're using the students and producing these weapons through the universities. They're funding 55% of scientific research. The Pentagon is funding 55% of scientific research at many U.S. universities. So it's the students developing these huge tracking programs. They've told me about it, where they were told they were designing tracking programs for equipment. But one of them said to me, after we did it, it looked to me like it would be much better for tracking people. Well, the University of California tracks every student from the time they're here at Berkeley and even before that until they die. And it's partly to extract donations from them that become part of an endowment or fund buildings or whatever they want to spend it on or it's dedicated to. But they are also killing alumni and students who have trust funds and will be heirs in wealthy families. And it's not just universities doing that. It's professional organizations, the John Birch Society and other organizations are doing that too. So if you want to die really fast today, just leave in your will a university or educational institution or some of the other crazy schemes, probably Scientology, that's Jesuit. The same things are happening. I know it's happening with Scientology. So where did all of this come from? Where did all of this programming, this mind control, where did they do the studies? Who funded it? Well, I have a lot of experience with it because I went to UC Davis as an undergraduate in the 1960s. Then I got a master's degree at Berkeley in the early 1990s. And then I went back and worked on my PhD at UC Davis. So I've seen all of this and very much of it at UC Davis, where the hidden secret monkey colony is still being used. When I was there in the 60s, the students talked about the monkeys having the top of their heads cut off and wires coming out of their brains that were antennas. And in this publication by NATO in their science series, D, it's called The Biology of Aggression. And this was primarily written by Delgado, who is Spanish, but he was very high up, a high-level colonel in the U.S. Army, and he was working on these animal studies and then the application to human beings. And they robotized, they erased memories, they did horrific things to young people, middle-aged people, African Americans, poor people, people of color, different religions, and they just use them like lab rats. This happened in Canada too. There are some young men who are older adults now, but they had their memories erased in this MK Ultra program, and they've been lying in a bed for 30 or 40 years because they don't have anything on their brain. So, or their brains were destroyed. So these old programs were developed by the OAS, Office of OSS, Office of Strategic Services in World War II, that left a leave-behind army that's called Gladio, and it's under NATO today in Europe. And the NATO is creating a lot of problems and hostilities throughout all of the countries and former members of the Soviet Union, these oil-rich Central Asian states and so forth. And I mean, I really can't blame the Russians for objecting to having NATO setting up ballistic missile facilities on countries bordering them. It's very, very crazy. And so I've learned a lot from the Ukraine situation. But these studies on neuro-linguistic programming on human beings were done at UC Davis, and they were done at Livermore Lab and Los Alamos and UCLA. They've been done all over the United States, in fact, all over the world. And a lot of them were turned over in 1989 by 2 KGB generals who went to the Livermore Lab and turned over these technologies of political control. And I asked my lab partner, why in the world were they allowed to be at the Lawrence Livermore Lab? It's one of our 2 premier nuclear weapons labs. And this was when we were at war with them. And he said, well, they're flipping the Soviet Union and turning it into the United States, and they're flipping the United States and turning it into the Soviet Union. This was in 1989. I thought it was outlandish. I couldn't imagine what he was talking about. And now we see this very thing happening, and it's being implemented through the Phoenix program, which was developed in the Vietnam War, through Project Popeye in Vietnam, which was weather modification. And of course, they went through neuro-linguistic programming and many, many other experiments and technologies. They just tested them in Vietnam on the civilian population. And the Phoenix program was set up. In fact, Tom Ridge was Governor Tom Ridge, who became the first Secretary of Homeland Security, was involved in the Phoenix program in Vietnam. So no wonder he became the first Secretary of Homeland Security. Now, the neuro-linguistic programming also happened in schools, universities. They did it all over, but especially in the military. And this is where they put people in front of a computer. This is how it was described by the man who did it. He was involved in the genocide in Rwanda, and he said they were put in front of computers with headsets on, and the computer programmed their minds and put triggers in and commands. And he said, I took the team down to Rwanda. We were told to kill everyone. And he said when we got down there, there were antennas set up that he'd never seen there before. And these were in the populated areas. And they turned those on when the genocide started. And the white people, the colonists who were being genocided, were also genociding each other. They were genociding their own children. These frequencies just took over people's minds and had commands that made them do things that they would never do. Now, I am seeing that program being used, being instituted, and being a major part of behavior and the social norm at the University of California campuses. I live in Berkeley. It's horrifying to see, and I can hear at night the parties of the students living in houses surrounding where I live, and they're chanting and singing and jumping up and down at night at their own parties and talking about overthrowing the United States. And Alfred, the neuro-linguistic programming is coming through their powerful cell phones. Each generation of these cell phones is more powerful, more sophisticated antennas, and now the flat array antennas that were developed by the Navy, the U.S. Navy in the 1970s, these are in the cell phones, in the lights, the street lights. They're in houses. They're built into buildings, and they're hidden in cars, and they are driving around and running around with these very powerful antennas and frequencies that they go through the police. The police control the gang stalkers, but they are injuring people and deliberately hitting them with frequencies that knock them on the ground or break their bones, or they're breaking people's teeth off. I have seen things that I don't even like talking about in the Bay Area, especially around the Berkeley campus, where I spend more time. But you are familiar with these programs over many decades, and so I know that you are very familiar with them.
Right, right. So now what they used to do, use these frequencies for gang stalking, say in the 70s, now they're escalating into assaults against civilians and building up to insurrections. Is that it?
That's what it is. And there are also, I couldn't understand why these beautiful young girls who were students and just nice looking guys, male students and everything, why were they walking around hitting people who were strangers with these frequencies and injuring them? And finally, I just kept watching them, and I realized that they're doing it with their cell phones. They can click on smart meters now. They're loaded up onto the smart meters. And for instance, in the laundromat next door, the students come in, and there'll be 4 or 5 of them, and they click their cell phones up to the smart meter at the front of the laundromat, and that turns it all on. They're all a network, and then they surround people who are targeted in the laundromat, and they're hitting them with frequencies from many directions. One person, and then they'll move on to the next person, and you have to pick up all of your clothes and leave the laundromat. You're going to be crippled by the time you get home and in pain for many hours if you don't get out of there. The campus now is so loaded with students wandering around in pairs. These are from different countries. They're Americans. They're every color, every size, male and female. And they're attacking anyone who tries to walk across the campus who the administration has decided, or the cops have decided, isn't welcome there. That's a public university. That's a public library. We paid for that. We're not working for them. They're working for us. And now they're telling us we can't access our own libraries. We can't access the UC campus, even though we're alumni, because we're not popular with them. And what this is an arbitrary deniability of service, of opportunities, of equality, and it's all illegal and it's all unconstitutional, and hardly anyone even realizes what is happening. But I did notice that while the parents were here this past week and weekend, because it's graduation week, none of this technology was turned on. They didn't want to take any chance that any parents or grandparents had any smell of this highly illegal and certainly unwelcome training of young people to overthrow and destroy their own countries, their own families, their own institutions. And they're getting a reward algorithm physically through the cell phone every time they use it to hurt someone or target someone. So that was the mystery finally. And now I realize that everything that's happening globally, it's all on a time schedule. It's one template. They're doing the same thing everywhere. And it's the Phoenix program from Vietnam and FEMA, which Janet Napolitano sold contracts for us to service 15 Commonwealth countries with our Homeland Security and our FEMA. So we're exporting it too.
Now let's verge, because there was a development yesterday in the sister city of Berkeley, California, which brings us up to a development that occurred that you were involved in, actually in Berkeley some years ago. And so could you talk about that breakthrough in Richmond, California yesterday that could potentially be a breakthrough by the citizens and could be used in a counterattack against this New World Order rollout?
Well, this is part of the breakthrough. And this was a very, very, very surprising, and really it's a thrilling thing to find out about. And I found out about it just before we started this interview. But the city of Richmond, which is next to, located just a little bit north of Berkeley, a few miles, the city council passed a resolution 5-2 to support the international, well, it's the Space Preservation Act of 2001, which you wrote, and I followed up and got a resolution for the city of Berkeley. City council did the same thing. They voted and passed a resolution that they were declaring the space, airspace above the city of Berkeley was prohibited from having space weapons pass through it or be detonated or anything. They cannot enter our space. And this goes up into lower orbital space. It means satellites too. And so I'd never done a resolution before. I was standing in 2001 on the, or two, in the city council chambers. The city council had no idea what they were voting for, but it sounded like a good idea, so it was unanimous. They passed it. And then a Japanese woman took the resolution from Berkeley and started circulating it in Japan. She was murdered for that. And then you told me, Alfred, that the Canadians took it to gather signatures, and they went into the Canadian Parliament with all these signatures and got the secret ballistic missile treaty canceled between Prime Minister Martin and George W. Bush.
Right.
So that was...
Stop Bush.
Yeah, stop Bush. So here we have Richmond is now reviving this resolution.
Now, with a twist.
With a twist, yes.
And the twist is this, that what Richmond adopted was H.R. 2977, which was the original Space Preservation Act, which Dennis Kucinich put in the hopper in October 2001, which prohibited all mind control weapons, including HAARP.
That's right.
And chemtrails.
That's right.
And that was before it was watered down at the behest of the Department of Defense.
That's right.
And so this is a blanket prohibition. A city council votes to ban mind control weapons use against residents, and we'll put that link in the article accompanying this interview and that article. So what that means is that what you just described occurring is now illegal in the city of Richmond, which is just adjacent to Berkeley.
That's right.
Would you talk about the implications of that? Because I think you can just take a bus or you can walk over to Richmond, right?
Yes, I can just jump on BART and go over there. I'm going to go over and congratulate the city council for doing that, and the citizens too. Richmond is primarily an African-American community, and they were brought very, very poor from the South in World War II, and they worked in the shipyards there. It's now a Chevron refinery, and it's where Dick Cheney is sending his tar sands oil deposits down for refining, and it's horribly polluted the whole Bay Area because the tar sands oil and gas has a lot of impurities in it, so it's kind of messy and pollutes a lot. But we have very aware, very informed communities in the Bay Area. We have over 1,000 activist organizations, and of course, the environmental movement came out of Berkeley. A lot of the West Coast is very, very activist, very, very up on issues. And I must say, we also have the most diverse populations in the United States. So 70,000 Afghanis live down in Hayward. We have festivals for every ethnic group, and also restaurants. Wonderful to live, and it's very, very interesting. It's extremely beautiful. You can be outdoors all the time, just about, and it has a very rich history. So it's beautiful here, but it's turning into a global nightmare, and it's starting here. And they're hooking all of these smart meters, the cell phones, everything up to servers now that were put on a ship from the base. All of the data flows to those servers on that ship, and they go up, they're uploaded onto the Inmarsat satellite system. They're stored on a server that is geostationary over the Cameroons in Africa, and then it's all funneled into headquarters in England. And so the information from the smart meters is being transmitted every minute. Everything that happens electronically with the grid, with appliances you're using, it's all mind controlled also. And these ships are going to be offshore all over the world where the constitutions don't allow this. So they're sneaking around international law and domestic law, and none of this should be allowed. Now, what Putin has done is to take international law and local laws, and he is turning the ship of the EU and the US in a new direction, and he's forcing them to follow the legal norms, which they've been getting away with by playing the margins. That's how they get away with it, like putting the ship offshore out in international waters so that they can do what is illegal in the continental US. So that's what's happening, and it's really amazing.
Well, now that you mentioned Putin, could you tell us a bit more about the breakthroughs that we're doing against this New World Order in terms of the U.S. blinking in the face-off against Russia?
Well, this is really interesting because I've been following the war in the Ukraine for a year. And last summer, there were really, really big battles, and it was the Ukrainian army is very poorly trained. They have completely incompetent management staff, and these poor soldiers were grabbed and kidnapped off the streets and everything, young boys and girls even, and driven to the war zone, which is in eastern Ukraine. And they were dropped off with no uniforms. They weren't even given guns. Poroshenko didn't even feed his soldiers. I saw videos of them catching wild snakes and roasting them over campfires. And a lot of the soldiers, 14,000 disappeared, Ukrainian soldiers. They just disappeared. And many of them walked across the war zone line, the front line, and joined the separatist militia because they didn't believe what they were doing was right, killing civilians and destroying infrastructure. And also they were hungry and they were fed up with incompetence. So Putin invited them to go into Russia. They were sent to Genghis Khan's boot camp, which he used for training sometime around then. And these camps and the organizational structure of government and society at his time are still practiced there. And went to Genghis Khan's boot camp. The militia who were untrained went, and I think they were there 4 or 5 months, and they got really trained. I mean, to be sniped into the area where this dispute is happening. And they did really, really well. And this is all on community television and local TV, and the militia wear cameras on their helmets. And so every day these different videos are loaded, and it's all information you can't ever see or get anywhere else in the mainstream. And Kiev won't put any of this up because they're the ones killing all these people. So it's been very, very interesting. And I've just seen the structure of the politicians so embedded in our society. I mean, we have them in the US too. I finally realized it's the same system. The Bushes and the Cheneys and people like that, they're all oligarchs, even Obama. So they, the ruling elite, stay in power on 2 legs. One leg is organized crime and the other leg is the military. And so those are the enforcers and the protectors of the oligarchs and the politicians at the top. And money is what gets them elected.
Right, right. Now it seems as though Putin has been able to really undercut the United States as a functioning global power. Is that correct or not?
Well, what he's done is he's outmaneuvered and out-negotiated Kerry and the U.S. on almost everything. And I think Russia today is not as strong and unified as the Soviet Union was, but it's getting there. And the benefit, actually, I believe Putin did a benefit to the United States to force them to get back in sync with international laws, and also to he's forcing them to join the community instead of carrying a big stick and using extortion and racketeering to blackmail EU partners or other allies into doing what the US wants them to do. And what happened with the Ukraine is that Russia did not want NATO or the EU in the Ukraine. So he did not support the Ukraine joining NATO or joining the EU. And when that started to happen and the US started moving in with NATO, then things started getting very destabilized in the Ukraine. And he's made the United States stronger by forcing them to obey and consider international law. But he's also forcing the U.S., instead of plundering and genociding everywhere and doing scorched earth in every country they go into, he's forcing them, instead of plundering and stealing, he's forcing them to go into more peaceful trading where both parties or all the parties involved with a vested interest benefit. And that's the Silk Road model, which is the only thing that's going to work in Central Asia and Asia, where this whole new trading bloc, two of them, have formed. And Putin started the Eurasian trading bloc, and President Xi of China just started the Asian trading bloc, and they're coming together, and they will be part of BRICS, and this is a whole new banking system. So what's happening is the Western model is being dumped, and the new model in the middle space, which is Russia and part of China, is on the rise, and that's the new economy. And even though the U.S. caused financial discomfort to Russia by declaring sanctions through lies against Russia, it backfired because Russia went out. They were forced to go out and make contracts to sell oil and gas and food products and whatever else they were exporting to Europe and the Ukraine. And so now Russia has markets all over the world. When President Xi went to Moscow for the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II, that was just a week or two ago, he and Putin signed over 200 contracts. These are multi-billion-dollar contracts for development, for pipelines, for food projects, all kinds of stuff, energy. And the rest of the world, Asian countries and Middle Eastern countries, they do not like paper money. They don't trust it. And that's the problem with economics today, is the fiat currency, which really has no real value. And the U.S. and other powerful entities just keep printing more money, and there's nothing to back it. So they were saying, oh, we're bankrupting Russia, blah, blah, blah. Well, what they didn't take into account is that over the last 6 years, Putin bought 40 tons of gold, and the entire currency, the ruble, is completely backed with gold. And even though the ruble declined in value compared to the dollar and other currencies, it quickly rebounded. And for the first quarter of 2015, it had the highest rating in the world of all currencies.
We were also talking about this kind of positive event, false flag,
right,
blowback. That is that it seems like Putin put on the Sochi Olympics, and then the West responded by putting on the false flag of MH370, the Malaysian plane. And now Putin put on the Red Square, where all these countries came together to celebrate a great victory, and the U.S. is responding by putting on the Jade Helm false flag for its citizens, which is the most negative thing that's ever happened in the history of the United States. This horrible negative blowback. I mean, can you talk about that?
It's so horrible. I have to laugh about it. It's embarrassing. It's unbelievable that a country like the United States would have policies like this that are just insane. They don't make sense at all. It's not statesmanship. It's not diplomacy. It's something else. And what it is the minuet agenda, where they give nothing, they take everything, and when they're through taking everything, they destroy what's left. And it takes decades for countries to recover from that Jesuit minuet, because the minuet has 3 steps: embrace, enfold, extinguish. And they've been doing it for 3,000 years at least.
And now it seems that the United States is the country that they're about to extinguish. Is that correct?
That's correct. The United States and Israel.
So could you talk more about that and what the citizens of these countries can do to deconstruct that?
Well, the United States is a very large country. It's a very rich country, and it certainly has a very, very talented and unique population. But the nuclear weapons program, the atmospheric testing program, which conducted 1,300 nuclear bomb tests at the Nevada test site, destroyed this country. Nuclear technologies destroyed the United States. The nuclear power plants, the nuclear weapons program, and the depleted uranium, the development of depleted uranium and neutron bombs for the battlefield starting in 1990 has destroyed global health. So we have a huge global health crash, or it's just going to be horrific consequences of all this radiation, because Fukushima, they won't even be able to turn it off for 100 years. It's never going to end in our lifetime. So the price of this hegemony, the price of the nuclear weapons program, which we've given to all the other countries, has been very high, especially high in the United States. And nuclear technologies are being used and were developed to be used to make nuclear weapons and to produce electricity, energy. But it's a very poor way to produce electricity. It's too expensive to for a normal business to survive, especially with the waste issue. But now we just see the agenda, this genocidal agenda, really opening up with the chemtrails, and what we're discovering are in the chemtrails, and seeing the health effects. And I mean, very strange things are happening now. Babies are being born recently, triplets, identical twin girl triplets were born just a couple weeks ago, and two of them were conjoined. In other words, they were grown together at the pelvis. Siamese twins or conjoined twins, and they will have to go under surgery. But the week before, two twin babies were born, identical girls, and one was born, I believe, with Down syndrome, and the other was not. So we're not just getting conjoined twins, we're getting even more bizarre situations surrounding the conjoined twins. And we're seeing it a lot in the animal world as well. And so when you have health issues in the animal world and in humans, then it's got to be something in the environment. And chemicals from fracking, the groundwater, the very ancient million-year-old aquifers deep in the ground are being poisoned with chemicals from fracking, which are illegal here. But Halliburton got a special exemption to poison Americans, to poison Scottish people, to poison people in New Zealand and Australia, wherever they're fracking. And they're mixing that underground, deep, very pure water with groundwater that's surface charged from rain and snow, and that's loaded with radiation. So you're putting radiation and chemicals together and multiplying the effects of very tiny amounts, causing very big consequences.
Now, meanwhile, Putin is conducting diplomacy, say, with Austria. Could you talk about that?
Well, this battle has gone on, this war zone has gone on for a year. And about 5 weeks ago, That would have been in at the beginning of March. No, the beginning of April, 2015. All of a sudden, this very young 32-year-old foreign minister from Austria suddenly went to Moscow. And things had gotten really out of hand anyway in the battle zone, when the Ukrainian army was trapped for like the 5th time in a year in a cauldron. They call it a cauldron. In other words, it's a boiling pot or a frying pan. And so this Ukrainian army, at least 10,000 men, were surrounded in January, and they were not able to get supplies or food or whatever. And the Ukrainian separatists from the eastern part, these are the ones fighting for independence, finally had to, they tried to get them to surrender. There were no battalion commanders or generals anywhere near the battlefield. They ran off to Kiev and abandoned all their soldiers and inexperienced. And they told them not to surrender. So something like 7,000 or 8,000, maybe 10,000 of the Ukrainian soldiers were killed in two or 3 days. And it's because they refused to surrender. They were occupying buildings. They were killing civilians. 100,000 people have died in the last year in the Ukraine. These are children and babies. And the Ukrainian soldiers are using depleted uranium. So now the doctors in the hospitals are asking for heart medicine and other medicines for newborn babies they're treating in the hospitals who are born with heart problems. And that's because of the radiation, the mutations caused by internal exposure.
Right, right. Now, what do you see as breakthroughs? How are we going to get through this?
Well, the breakthroughs are Putin and the Russians and how they have developed and responded and pursued a very, very clean, a very pure, a very fair solution to this war that's going on. The Novorussians don't want the war. The militia want to go home to their families. The Russians don't want the war. It's destabilizing their border and having repercussions there. The Europeans, the EU doesn't want war. They've already been through World War I and World War II. They are not interested in having all the thugs and murderers and gangs that are now armed by the Ukrainian government, because they're using them on the battlefield too. And Europe won't even issue visas to Ukrainians because they don't want Nazis coming to European countries and starting a whole Nazi movement. They already got rid of the Nazis in World War II. And the reason that Russian participation and that 70th anniversary was so important for all European leaders to go and attend is because no one lost more personnel and more civilians in World War II than the Russians. 25 million people were killed in Russia in the Soviet Union in World War II. And something like 12 million Russian soldiers died, more than in all other countries. So those other countries should have been there to honor the Russians who gave their lives for European lives. And the U.S. wouldn't allow it, if you can imagine that. And the U.S. also was helped steadfastly through World War II by the Russians, by the Soviets. So there are a lot of issues in the Ukraine and related to the Ukraine surrounding this But this is a global event. This is where very, very bad practices could actually destroy, or bad decisions destroy Russia. And right now, Russia is the only country strong enough and with big nuclear weapons to resist the U.S. So we need to encourage Russia. We need to support Russia. We need to educate Americans and Canadians and people all over the world about what is really happening, and not let them drink the Kool-Aid that is going to take them in the wrong direction and to do things that are not in their own best self-interest.
Right, right. Now, this is a question that just occurred to me, going back to our history in the Berkeley City Council, and now we have the action of the Richmond City Council around the Space Preservation Act, although it was two different versions of it. Let me ask you this as a question. Here we have the Richmond City Council passing H.R. 2977, which bans mind control weapons. That is, it bans mind control weapons use against residents. Do you think it's feasible for yourself and other residents of Berkeley, California, to go to the City Council of Berkeley and say, hey, look, you passed the Space Preservation Act some years ago, and now Richmond's passed it, but they passed the improved version, which banned mind control weapons. Now, we all know what has happened to Berkeley ever since Napolitano came in. This thing is escalated. How about doing what Richmond did here and passing the exact statute that our sister city just passed, and you bring them the statute so that we don't have all of our senior citizens, all of our non-students being clobbered every day with this abuse by EMF weapons. What do you think, Leuren?
I think it's a great idea, and I think it's terribly important to include students from the campus, because so many of them have died from the Fukushima radiation. And I started talking in my interviews about doing an update every few months on how many more students had died, because their obituaries are on the front page of the student newspaper, the Daily Cal, which is online if people want to read it or watch this. But I started noticing, once a month there was an obituary. And maybe it was a young woman who'd spent the summer in Hawaii surfing. She came back, and 2 months later she was dead from a heart attack, and she's only 19. And I kept reading these stories, and pretty soon it's every week. And finally I realized that Fukushima was really impacting the athletes, people who are physically active outdoors. Californians spend a lot of time outdoors, and then the elderly, and the babies born with birth defects or infant mortality, and newborn fatalities, stillborns. The embryos and the developing fetuses are the most susceptible to the ionizing radiation and these toxins, the chemtrails and everything. So if people can't do it for themselves, they need to do it for future generations. And these babies that are trying to be born now in the middle of a nuclear war. This is a global nuclear war, and it doesn't stop until all that radiation is washed out and immobilized into the environment.
Right, right. Well, we'll be interested to track what occurs when you do go to the Richmond City Council, get a copy of the statute, and maybe bring it to the Berkeley City Council and see how that occurs as they find out what they have passed in the past and what they need to pass now etc.
Right. Right.
Well, yeah.
But
Could
what I want to say is, there's nothing to be afraid of. Um, we really have no choice. We have to resolve this. We have to find the answers. Our leaders are not going to. And right now, I don't see anybody else helping us. I mean, countries can't even help themselves. Nobody's helping. Well, some people are helping Ukraine, but they want to loot it. So I just think that what's happening in these other countries, Rwanda, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, those are going to be our countries. That's going to be happening in our countries very soon, and for sure in the United States. And Americans are not prepared for this. They're not, a lot of them are not aware of it. And a Homeland Security has the right, they have all the keys, and they have the ability and the commitment to lock up all the food in the United States. And people who don't pay in gold or pay in money or whatever for food, they're just not going to eat. They won't be fed.
right.
If you're in
Wow.
prison now where they're using prison labor to assemble all the army equipment and clothes for free for the American military, where we are manufacturing work clothes for Bangladesh in our prisons that's cheaper than Bangladesh to produce in Bangladesh for their own people. So the economics in the United States is just making a really, really sharp turn to exploitative slavery. These are prison slaves, or these are economic slaves, or these are loan slaves, like these poor students who are graduating with, if you're been to medical school, you can have $500,000 in student loans. Teachers with teaching degrees, credentials, start out and in salaries in California that are lower. They're so low they qualify for food stamps and welfare. So the whole reward system, the economy, everything is going backwards and being turned upside down and inside out. And the only people who are going to change it it's us. So we need to start sharing this information. Everything that I've said, everything I've been saying for decades has all come true. It's all been proven to be correct. And it's a terrible message, but someone has to warn humanity. And I'm doing what I can. Alfred, you're doing what you can. Laurence is doing what he can do. And it just takes all of us doing something, some small part, to overcome this darkness that's coming across the shadow of like a shadow over the earth. And we just don't have to go along with it. And, once they realize it's not going to work, they just disappear they just disappear. They go scheme and come back with another template.
Right.
It's a new game now.
Yeah. So, once again, tell us where people can contact you and where they can bring themselves up to date on all of your writings and your news and your articles.
And recommendations, especially to people on what to eat, how to protect yourself, how to get a reverse osmosis water filtration system. You can order it from Amazon and put it in under your kitchen sink. It's very easy to do. And there are many, many hints and information, and it's through the lens of science. It's not sciencey and boring to read. It's really exciting to read because of the way I write and explain things. And it's been very successful. LeurenMoret.info. in terms of educating the public, increasing awareness, and empowering people just to take that first step. And it's that first step to oppose things you don't believe in or you don't think are a good idea. That's the hardest part, that first step. And once you do that and you realize you're not alone, we're not alone, there are more of us than the bad guys. And then we just start finding each other. When you're in the right spirit, when you're doing things for the right reason, the right people just come and find you, and the universe provides everything that you need. It's about trusting yourself and trusting the universe.
Well, thank you. We really want to thank you for joining us, and we want to thank you for your work and for having put together this program. And we really look forward to your joining us in the future, Leuren, as events develop. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. And we want to really keep our eyes on Putin and carefully assess what he's doing and how he does it, because he's winning in this new game. This is a new game. It's with social media. It's with neuro-linguistic programming. It's with all kinds of tricks and traps and schemes and scams that we've never encountered before. But we've survived before, and we're going to survive this too. But we need the right information, and we're going to get that by giving it and sharing it. And LeurenMoret.info was created by Laurence Lincoln Battis III. He's done a great job on it. It's really beautiful. And I know that people really like it because they they spend a lot of time on it. So thank you, Alfred, and thank you to everyone who's listening and watching.
Certainly. Yes. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.